Bitcoin is going to hit 1 million, or it's going to hit 10 million, or maybe 100 million, right? Michael Saylor thinks that we will hit, I believe, 20 million in just a few years. How realistic is this? Now, in this video, I want to talk about relative valuations. I want to talk about market caps. How large is Bitcoin relative to major stocks, or relative to the entire stock market, or relative to precious metals, or relative to the bond market? Let's have a look at, in today's dollars, if we just look at outperformance, how high Bitcoin could go. Because when we just look at this, say, over the very, very long term, right, over the next 50 years, over the next 100 years, then $1 million Bitcoin doesn't really mean much, right? Because, say, the money supply goes 100x, then Bitcoin's price also goes 100x. This doesn't really mean much. When we're talking about Bitcoin being at 1 million or at 10 million US dollars, we kind of mean this in today's money, right? Or at least we maybe assume a 2 or 3x in monetary expansion, but we don't necessarily think about a 100x. So if we just look at this, how dominant, so to speak, can Bitcoin become as a part of the entire financial system? Let's have a look at how it compares to currently other valuations. So currently, Bitcoin's market cap is at 1.2 trillion. Now, what compares to 1.2 trillion? We've got, for example, the market of silver, all of silver that's ever been mined and that's tradable. That's 1.4 trillion. So very, very close to Bitcoin. Or let's have a look at cryptocurrencies market cap, like Bitcoin plus all the rest. That's at 2.7 trillion. Now, we look at 1 to 3 trillion, somewhere around that mark. Within that category, we also have single major tech companies in the US. So, for example, Apple has a market cap of 3.3 trillion. So roughly 3 times the market cap of Bitcoin. Microsoft has a market cap of 3 trillion, Nvidia of 2.6 trillion, Google and AWS or Amazon a market cap of 1.8 trillion. So all of those things are somewhere in the same region, right? We either have one major winning tech company, or we look at Bitcoin, or we look at the silver market. So Bitcoin is roughly the market cap of one of those tech giants. Now, what I found interesting when looking at the numbers is actually how much bigger the gold market is relative to the silver market. So gold, right, the entire gold that has ever been mined and that's floating around, gold is actually way larger than I ever expected. It's $15 trillion of market cap. And again, silver has a market cap of 1.4 trillion. So gold is roughly 10 times the size of silver. Or all of gold combined is the major tech companies combined. So if you had all the gold in the world, you could buy Google and Amazon and Microsoft and Nvidia. You could buy all of those companies if you had all the gold. Now, the size of gold is also very large when comparing this to the stock market. So when we look at the US stock market, right, what's the market cap of the US stock market? That's only 45 trillion. So only 3 times the gold market. Now, I find this super surprising because I think most people will have way more money in stocks than in gold, right? People say one should have maybe 5 to 10% of their portfolio in gold and the rest in stocks and bonds and property, etc. But it appears as if there are some people that simply have tons and tons of gold. Otherwise, it wouldn't be possible that the gold market is 1/3 of the US stock market. Now, one thing that helps gold, which doesn't help US stocks, is that gold is global, right? We're looking at US stocks mainly being invested by US citizens. So when we look at the global stock market, the relationship looks a bit more reasonable. So all of stocks combined globally have a market cap of roughly 110 trillion. So a bit less than 3 times of the US stock market. I find this also very interesting, right? More than a third of all of the equities in the world, a third of the value is in the US. And now when we look at gold as a global asset relative to the global stock market, it makes more sense, right? Roughly 1/7, 1/8 maybe of all of stocks value is in gold, right? Or the stock market value is roughly 7-8 times the size of the gold market. And so does it make sense that Bitcoin is at 1.2 trillion? Probably not, because it's similar to gold, a global asset, right? Everybody around the world can invest in it. Will it beat gold in the end? Who knows, right? There needs to be some major custodians that don't hold Bitcoin yet that should be holding Bitcoin. For example, central banks or other governments besides just El Salvador. Some major banks that hold Bitcoin on their balance sheet might help as well. So you would need real major institutional adoption. I think Bitcoin is still somewhat away from this. It's still very volatile. It's still not really accepted as a replacement to gold. And because of that, it's only trading within the valuations of only one major tech company, right? Such as Nvidia or Google or Amazon. Now, the US bond market, so the debt market of the US, is also interesting. It has roughly the same size as the stock market. And again, I believe most people don't hold that many bonds. And so who holds all of that bonds? Yeah, central banks, of course, some institutional investors, some insurances. But a lot of that value might also just be artificial, right? Very similar to how the crypto market works, right? If you issue 1 million tokens, but you only put 100 of those tokens in a liquidity pool, and then you're trading those 100 tokens, push up the price, then all of those 900 tokens go up in value to the same degree, right? You're just increasing the value of a few tokens, but the overall market cap then balloons because you're holding a lot of tokens on the side that are actually not liquid. I believe in the bond market something very similar is happening because the Federal Reserve and many other central banks are simply holding that debt.
Here's the problem with crypto YouTube. People promoting becoming degen or buying 100x coins. That's what gives clicks, but that's not what's going to bring you forward. I refuse to take money from centralized exchanges. I refuse to take money from crypto projects. I refuse to pump and dump a coin and filling up my pockets in the background. I don't do any of this. Instead, I share my knowledge in the form of tutorials in the premium membership. So that's content that won't do well on YouTube, but that builds up skill over time. You can also directly contact me over there. You can directly pick my brain. Feel free to check it out. TheBitcoinStrategy.com is the link.
Prices in the bond market are not necessarily 100% discovered by market mechanisms. Bond market prices are very much manipulated because it's directly linked to the solvency of a country. Now let's go back one step again and let's talk about Bitcoin, right? Bitcoin to 1 million or Bitcoin to 10 million, etc. And let's talk about this in today's values, right? So how much would Bitcoin have to outperform, relatively speaking? If Bitcoin had the same market cap compared to gold, then it would be at a price of roughly 750,000. So not even reaching the million. So if we are expecting a 10x outperformance versus the rest of the financial market, we are also expecting at the same time that we see some major adoption of Bitcoin in the central banks, etc. If you think that it's unlikely that Bitcoin is going to get adopted by major central banks and by major governments, if you think Bitcoin will stay a private investment, then it's not very reasonable to assume that Bitcoin will be at 750K, at least in today's dollars. What kind of world would we live in if Bitcoin was now at 10 million? If Bitcoin was to reach 5 million, then the market cap of Bitcoin would be larger than all of the stocks on the planet. So Bitcoin would be a major common asset class across all retirement accounts. People would consider, should I rather save in property or in Bitcoin or in stocks? It would directly compete on a very similar level. It would be totally normal to say, I don't have any house, I have all my money in Bitcoin. It wouldn't be anything extraordinary to say anymore if Bitcoin was at those kinds of market caps. If Bitcoin was to reach 10 million, then it would be at very similar levels to all of the bond market plus stock market globally. It would be as important as all of traditional finance. And so I believe thinking in those kind of relations probably makes more sense to simply just drawing logarithmic regression charts on the Bitcoin price and say it will 10x every 4 years, right? This is not going to happen. A regular fast 10x of Bitcoin's US dollar price can only happen if the US dollar itself collapses, if we suddenly get into hyperinflation. If we don't get into hyperinflation, if we simply just continue on our merry way, similar to right now, then in today's dollars, more than $1 million per Bitcoin I believe, is quite optimistic. Again, at $1 million, Bitcoin will already have beaten gold in terms of market cap. And gold, again, is 1/3 of all of US equities. Bitcoin is currently as large as one major tech giant. Could it be as large as 2 or 3 major tech giants? Yes, probably. But will it be larger than the US stock market, or will it be larger than all of global stock markets? I'm not so sure. It would definitely be a very different world compared to the one that we are currently living in. Governments would have to start incentivizing people to save for their retirement in Bitcoin. Central banks would have to accumulate Bitcoin. And on top of that, we probably would also need a global catalyst, maybe different countries openly competing for acquiring more and more Bitcoin. Could it happen in 30, 40 years? Maybe. Will it happen in the next 5 years? Probably not. And so I believe Bitcoin is becoming somewhat more mature. It's now a regulated asset. It does have good growth potential, similar to tech stocks, but it's probably not going to do 2, 3, 4, 5x's in very brief periods of times anymore. It's simply just another nice addition in a well-diversified portfolio. And whenever we get the doubters, whenever we see crashes of 60, 70% in the Bitcoin price, then it's time to scoop up a lot because, again, there's long-term certainty, I believe, in Bitcoin's development. But when you're buying for the current prices, I believe it's somewhat unrealistic to assume that Bitcoin will beat gold in terms of market cap in the next 2 or 3 years. It's probably not going to happen. If you got something out of this video, feel free to give this a like. It helps the channel grow. Feel free to also subscribe. Feel free to also join our Telegram channel. The link to the Telegram channel is down below. Looking very much forward to chatting with you. Cheers!